Anatoli has just finished his shift at the U-70 facility and left without telling anyone what just happened. A beam of protons traveling near the speed of light had passed directly through his brain. Thinking nothing of it, he returns home and goes to sleep, completely unaware of what's about to happen. But by the time he woke up, he should not have been alive. After a temporary malfunction in the U-70 synchrotron's detector system, Anatoli Petrovich Bugorski called the beam operators in the control room and told them he'd be in the experiment hall in 5 minutes. The operators needed to know this because inside that hall, the accelerated proton beam was extracted from the main circular vacuum tube and traveled through the open air, passing through various detectors. And before anyone could enter, the operators had to make sure the beam was removed from the room. But the supposedly locked door leading to the experiment hall was unlocked, and a sign that should have warned Bugorski that the beam was still active was turned off. What was supposed to be a routine inspection instead sent 76 billion electron volts of energy directly through his brain, creating a flash reportedly brighter than 1,000 suns. Anatoli had done this same procedure hundreds of times, but as a 35-year-old particle physicist at the Protvino Institute of High Energy Physics, he understood the risks, or at least he thought he did. The U-70 proton synchrotron was located beneath the science town of Protvino in Moscow Oblast, roughly 100 kilometers south of Moscow. It was a massive circular accelerator built around a vacuum tube, stretching nearly 1.5 kilometers long, or just under 1 mile. Inside, radio frequency electric fields accelerated packets of protons to roughly 99.992% of the speed of light, while powerful electromagnets guided the beam around the ring. The entire purpose was to smash particles into targets at extreme energies. For years, Anatoli had worked around a machine built to test the limits of physics. But on that day, the U-70 synchrotron was about to test the limits of his own body. An accident like this should have been impossible, because Anatoli should never have been able to enter the experiment hall while the beam was still active. The safety protocols were simple. The beam had to be removed from the hall. The door leading to it should have been automatically locked, and a warning sign above the door was supposed to stay lit. But on this day, everything failed simultaneously. When Anatoli called the control room and said he would be in the experiment hall in 5 minutes, he'd reached the hall a little earlier than expected, and the automatic lock that should have sealed the door was switched off. During the previous experiment, the beam had been run at low intensity, and to save time, the technical staff had simply disabled the door's interlock and never switched it back on. This was never an accepted safety standard. The rule was that the safety mechanism stayed active no matter the beam's intensity. Disabling it was just a shortcut some staff took. On top of that, the warning light bulb had just burned out at the worst possible moment. Anatoli knew something wasn't right, but he proceeded anyway. Once inside the chamber, he went towards the malfunctioning detector and bent down to check the equipment. In less than 1/1000th of a second, the particle beam instantly pierced Anatoli's skull. A pulse containing 1 trillion protons, each carrying a kinetic energy of 76 billion electron volts, tore through his head at nearly 300 million meters per second. The beam entered through the back of his head, burning a diagonal path through his brain before exiting near the left side of his nose. Somehow, Anatoli felt no pain, but he knew something was wrong when he saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns. And yet, he still finished his work, recorded the visit in the channel logbook, and without saying a word to anyone, went home. Throughout the night, his symptoms only got worse, and by the morning, he was taken to the secret hospital number 6 in Moscow with the left side of his head swollen. For Anatoli, getting help for a case this rare inside the Soviet Union was extremely complicated. But today, finding care is a lot simpler thanks to ZocDoc, which is the sponsor of today's video. Because honestly, a lot of us put off appointments way longer than we should. Not because we don't care, because calling around, checking who takes your insurance, waiting on hold, and hearing the next opening is months away can make the whole thing feel overwhelming. For me, it was a checkup I kept pushing to next week, But every time I thought about it, I remembered the hassle of figuring out insurance and going back and forth on the phone, so I'd drop it. After a while, I realized how long I'd been avoiding it and knew I had to do something. ZocDoc makes this entire process much easier. You can search and compare local, in-network doctors, read real patient reviews, look through detailed doctor profiles, and see actual appointment openings right there. Then you can instantly book the visit online. So when I made the decision to take care of myself and went to ZocDoc, I was seen within a week of logging on. ZocDoc has over 150,000 providers across more than 200 specialties, and appointments usually happen within 24 to 72 hours, sometimes even the same day, and it's free to use. So don't keep putting your health off. Click the link in the description or go to ZocDoc.com/Storified and check that appointment off your to-do list. Anatoli was immediately placed into intensive care, where the country's leading radiologists and doctors took over his case. But once they calculated the radiation dose he'd received, most of them expected him to die within days. The official medical record made the reason clear. It described an intense, high-energy proton beam, just 2 by 3 millimeters in cross-section, passing from the occipital region at the back of his head through the mediobasal structures of the left temporal region, the pyramid of the left temporal bone, the bony labyrinth of the middle ear, the tympanic cavity, and the jaw fossa, before exiting through the tissue of the left wing of his nose. The estimated dose was 200,000 Roentgens at the entrance point and 300,000 Roentgens at the exit, due to the beam's scattering through tissue and bone. For context, a whole-body dose of around 400 Roentgens can kill about half of those exposed within 60 days without treatment. And even though Anatoli's exposure was concentrated along a narrow beam path, doctors calculated his local dose at 750 times that amount. So why wasn't he dead? You see, it all came down to where the beam actually released most of its energy. Inside the main circular tube of the accelerator, the beam travels through vacuum with a kinetic energy of 76 billion electron volts with almost no resistance. But the moment those protons pass through any other material like air, tissue, or bone, they begin losing energy through ionization and eventually stop. In living tissue, that lost energy is deposited along the beam path, knocking electrons loose from atoms and causing radiation damage that can kill cells, destroy tissue, damage DNA, and eventually lead to cancer. However, charged particles like protons actually release the majority of their energy right before coming to a stop, which is where the most concentrated damage occurs. This is called the Bragg peak. And because the proton's energy is known, physicists can calculate exactly how deep that peak will occur inside the body. In proton therapy, doctors use the same principle to aim the peak inside a localized tumor, destroying it while sparing nearby sensitive organs like the brain, spinal cord, or eyes. However, even though the beam that passed through Bugorski was far more powerful than anything used in therapy, he was somehow still alive. This is because Anatoli's head simply did not have enough stopping power to bring those ultra-high energy protons to a stop inside his brain. Instead of depositing the full Bragg peak inside his head, much of the beam passed straight through, releasing its most damaging energy beyond his skull. This meant that the actual dose Anatoli received was in fact much lower than the hundreds of thousands of Roentgens. But this is not the only reason why he survived. According to a Russian report, the beam seems to have passed through one of the only possible paths that avoided vital brain regions and major blood vessels, which, even at the lower absorbed dose, could have been instantly fatal if hit. Although he felt no pain, his suffering had only just begun. His treatment was overseen by Dr. Angelina Guskova, the pioneer of radiation medicine in the Soviet Union, the same physician who would later help lead the treatment of victims from the Chernobyl disaster. The 6th hospital where she worked was run by the Ministry of Medium Machine Building, or Sredmash. It was the country's secret clearinghouse for radiation casualties, treating the wounded from nuclear plants, research reactors, and even nuclear submarines. It wouldn't become known abroad until the Chernobyl meltdown in 1986. Everything surrounding Anatoli's case was sealed away in that secret hospital. What his treatments actually were remains unknown to this day. Some reports say the injury wasn't treated at all. The doctors simply managed his symptoms and waited for him to die. But he didn't. Against every expectation, the radiation sickness that should have ravaged his body never came. A year and a half later, Anatoli returned to Protvino, to the very same position, the very same beam and instruments that had nearly killed him. That same year, he defended his PhD he had prepared before the accident, but the damage never left him. Mental work began to exhaust him far more quickly than before, and he developed epileptic seizures as a consequence of the accident, though these could be managed with medication. He lost all hearing in his left ear, replaced by a relentless internal ringing. Over the years, the nerves on the left side of his face atrophied and the muscles became paralyzed, freezing that half of his expression in place. And one side of his face seemed to stop aging. Later in life, only half of his forehead would wrinkle when he concentrated. To this day, Anatoli Bugorski is reported to still be alive, a man who survived something no human body was ever meant to survive. Thanks again to ZocDoc for partnering with us and for helping us all take better care of our health.